My name is Erin Caldwell, and at 36 years old, I never imagined I'd owe my freedom to my 15-year-old daughter. Just last fall, my life imploded in a way I'm still learning to process. For over a decade, I'd tried to live up to the expectations of my parents, Douglas and Margaret Caldwell, pillars of Seattle society. My father, a self-made real estate magnate, prided himself on running both his business and his family with the same efficiency. My mother was the consummate hostess, obsessed with appearances. Growing up, love always felt conditional. Praise came with strings attached. Disagreement meant silent treatment, then strategic reminders of everything I owed them. When I married Travis Grant, my father's Rising Star project manager, they were thrilled. For years, it seemed like everything was finally in order. A handsome husband, a waterfront craftsman home, 2 children, Sophie, thoughtful and perceptive, and Noah, my gentle 9-year-old. But behind the picture-perfect image, Travis had grown increasingly controlling. He dismissed my freelance design work as hobby money and insisted on overseeing every household expense. The final blow came when I discovered his affair with a 27-year-old interior designer he'd hired. The divorce was a public spectacle. Headlines, whispers, awkward encounters at my kids' school events. Through all of it, my parents projected polite sympathy. They sent flowers, invited me to dinners, and assured me they were on my side. For a while, I believed them. Then the invitation arrived, a black linen envelope with gold-embossed script. Douglas and Margaret Caldwell invite you to celebrate 45 years of marriage. The evening promised a gala reception at the Cordillera Grand, a landmark hotel overlooking Elliott Bay. It sounded like an opportunity for closure, maybe even healing. Sophie wasn't so sure. "Are you really going to that?" she asked one night as I ironed my only formal dress, one I'd worn before the divorce. "It's their anniversary, Soph," I sighed. "I can't not show up." She watched me silently, her expression guarded. When the evening came, I spent hours getting us ready. Noah wore the little blue blazer my mother had bought him. Sophie relented and put on the navy dress she'd been avoiding, though she complained it was too tight. As we pulled up to the Cordillera Grand, I tried to quiet the gnawing worry in my chest. Inside, the ballroom was transformed. White roses climbing gold lattice, hundreds of candles flickering along the walls, strings of delicate lights overhead. The guest list read, like a who's who of Seattle's old guard. Developers, attorneys, my father's golfing friends. My parents stood near the entrance, regal and composed. "Erin, darling." My mother air-kissed my cheek. "I'm so glad you could make it." Her eyes skimmed over Sophie and Noah with appraisal. "You both look presentable," she said. "Margaret," my father interjected, voice low. "Hello, Dad," I said, trying not to flinch when he didn't hug me. He bent and scooped Noah into a practiced embrace. "There's my little man. Come on, let's get you settled at the head table." As they walked away, Sophie slipped her hand into mine. "Is it always going to feel like this?" she murmured. "Like what?" "Like we're visitors in our own family." I swallowed, unsure how to answer. Before I could think of something reassuring, a ripple of movement at the entrance pulled my attention. Standing there, beaming as if nothing had ever happened, was Travis, in a dark suit tailored to perfection. And beside him, her hand resting lightly on his arm, was the woman who had destroyed my marriage. Claire. I felt my breath catch in my throat. The last time I'd seen Claire, she was smirking at me across the mediation table while her engagement ring flashed under the fluorescent lights. I had assumed, naively, that Travis would never bring her here. But as I watched my parents greeting them like beloved family, I realized just how wrong I was. Sophie stiffened beside me. "You didn't know they were coming, did you?" she whispered. "No," I said, my voice hoarse. My mother ushered Claire into the ballroom, fussing over her dress. Travis was already laughing with my father, as though nothing had ever happened between us. I felt like the walls were closing in. "Let's get a drink," I murmured to Sophie. But before I could move, my father's voice boomed across the space. "Everyone, our guests of honor!" People turned. I realized, with a sick twist of my stomach, that he was gesturing to Travis and Claire. "They've come to join us on this special night," he announced, his smile broad. "Family should always be together, no matter what." I felt a flush creep up my neck. I forced a smile, nodded politely, and steered Sophie toward the bar. Behind me, I could hear the hushed comments, the pitying glances. The woman with the failed marriage, the one who couldn't keep her perfect life intact. I ordered a glass of Chardonnay I could barely afford. Sophie watched me over the rim of her water glass. "I hate this," she said quietly. I swallowed. "It's just a few hours." She didn't respond. Her eyes were fixed on my parents and Travis, deep in conversation. Noah came running up, beaming. "Grandpa says I get to sit next to him and Travis at dinner," he chirped. "He said they have a surprise for me." A chill prickled down my spine. "What surprise?" He shrugged. "Something about my future." Sophie and I exchanged a look. We moved to the dining area as the servers began guiding guests to their tables. My place card was tucked near the far end, next to a group of my father's colleagues I barely knew. Travis's name was next to my father's at the head table. As I sank into my seat, I tried to tell myself it didn't matter, that I'd be gone soon, back to my small apartment where I didn't have to perform for anyone. But when I glanced down the length of the table, I saw Claire's hand resting possessively on the back of Noah's chair, as though she had every right to be there. I looked for Sophie, but she had slipped away. "Probably to the bathroom," I told myself. But I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling in my gut. The first course was served. Some elaborate seafood concoction I couldn't taste. Travis raised his glass in a toast to my parents. Claire beamed at him. My mother dabbed delicately at her eyes, moved by the spectacle. "Such a perfect evening," she said when she finally approached me. I mustered a polite nod. Sophie returned and sank into her chair, her phone clutched in her hand. "Everything okay?" I asked. She didn't look at me. "Fine," she said flatly. But I noticed the way her fingers trembled around the phone case. As dessert arrived, my father stood again, tapping his glass for attention. If I could have everyone's attention. The crowd quieted. "Tonight is not only a celebration of 45 years with my extraordinary wife," he began. "It is also a time to reflect on the future of the Caldwell family." I felt the prickle of unease sharpening. He gestured to Travis. "Some of you know that Travis has been an integral part of our family and our company for many years," he continued, "and while personal circumstances have changed," his eyes flicked to me, unreadable, "our commitment to continuity has not." A ripple of murmurs spread through the room. I looked at Travis. He wasn't meeting my gaze. Sophie was watching me, her expression tight with something I couldn't name. My father lifted his glass. "To the future, to the next generation of Caldwells who will carry on our legacy." As everyone drank, I sat frozen. Sophie leaned over, her voice low but urgent. "Mom," she whispered, "we need to talk. Now." I tried to smile, to pretend everything was fine for the sake of the onlookers. "Not here," I murmured. Sophie's grip tightened on my arm. "Please, trust me." Her voice wavered. That was when I realized she was genuinely scared. I nodded, my throat dry. "All right," I said. We rose together, ignoring the curious glances as we slipped from the ballroom into the hushed hallway. I had no idea that in the next few minutes, everything I believed about my family would shatter. In the hallway outside the ballroom, the muffled strains of the string quartet faded behind the heavy doors. Sophie leaned against the wall, her face pale. "Tell me what's going on," I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady. She swallowed. "I didn't want to ruin the night," she whispered. "But I can't let them do this to you." "Do what?" Sophie pulled out her phone, unlocking it with trembling hands. "Look." She handed it to me. The screen displayed a series of text messages, long conversations between her and a number I didn't recognize. I scrolled up to see the contact name, Aunt Joanne. My breath caught. I hadn't spoken to Joanne in over 15 years. When I was in college, she'd disappeared from our lives after a bitter falling out with my father. He'd called her greedy, unstable, untrustworthy. I'd believed him. "Why are you talking to her?" I asked, though my voice sounded far away to my own ears. Sophie looked up, her eyes glassy. "Because she knows exactly what Grandpa is doing," she said. I stared at her, unable to process. "She told me Grandpa and Travis have been meeting for months," Sophie continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "She said they're trying to transfer the Mercer Island property into Travis's name, and they're planning to file for a custody modification for Noah." My stomach lurched. "What?" "They think you're unstable," she said bitterly. "They're saying you're too emotional to manage the house, that you'd probably sell it, that Noah would have a better life living with Travis and Grandpa." My vision blurred. "That's absurd," I whispered. "I thought maybe Aunt Joanne was just exaggerating," Sophie said. "Until tonight." She opened her photo gallery and showed me a series of images she'd taken. Pages of legal documents, my father's letterhead, my name and Travis's name printed in bold, transfer of property, custody petitions. "I found these in Grandpa's office at the house," she said. "I went in there to look for a quiet place to study while we were there last weekend. He forgot to lock the cabinet." I tried to speak, but no words came out. Sophie's hand shook as she scrolled to the last image, a handwritten note in my father's familiar script. "Announce plans during the anniversary reception. Apply family pressure to gain compliance." I closed my eyes, willing the room to stop spinning. "They were going to do it tonight," she said. "I'm sure of it." I thought of my father's toast, of the way he'd gestured to Travis and Noah while barely acknowledging me. The entire evening, every polite smile, every condescending pat on the arm was a carefully orchestrated setup. "I'm sorry," Sophie choked out. "I didn't know what to do. That's why I was texting Aunt Joanne. She told me to get you out of here." I pressed a hand to my mouth, fighting back nausea. "I'm so sorry," I whispered, even though I wasn't sure who I was apologizing to. Sophie's eyes filled. "Mom, you have to believe me." I reached out and pulled her into a hug. "I do," I said fiercely. "I believe you." For a long moment we stayed there, clinging to each other in the dim hallway. Then the doors opened behind us, spilling light and laughter into the corridor. My mother appeared, her expression tight with irritation. "There you are," she said crisply. "Douglas is about to make the final announcement." I turned to face her, feeling something inside me shift. "We're leaving," I said. Her eyes narrowed. "Don't be dramatic, Erin." "This isn't drama," I said, my voice low. "It's self-respect." I took Sophie's hand. "You can tell Dad we'll discuss this another time," I added. Margaret's mouth pressed into a thin line. "Don't do something you'll regret," she hissed. I met her gaze evenly. I'm not the one who should be worried about regrets. I didn't wait for her reply. I turned away and walked back into the ballroom. Noah was sitting at the head table between my father and Travis, a slice of cake in front of him. As I approached, my father's expression turned stony. "We're in the middle of the program," he said coldly. "We're leaving," I repeated. Travis looked up, surprised. "Erin, this is not your decision," I snapped. Noah looked up at me, confused. Mom? Get your jacket, sweetheart, I said gently. We're going home. I felt every pair of eyes on me as I guided my son away. Sophie followed close behind, her face pale but determined. We passed the photographer, who lowered his camera awkwardly, past my mother, who was whispering furiously to a cluster of relatives, past the string quartet, still playing as if nothing was wrong. As the cool night air hit my face, I felt a rush of something like relief. For the first time in years, I wasn't pretending everything was fine. I was finally ready to face the truth. And this time, I wouldn't be alone. We drove home in tense silence, the Seattle skyline sliding past in a blur of neon and rain. Noah fell asleep within minutes, his head lolling against the window. Sophie sat rigid in the passenger seat, her arms wrapped around herself. I felt like I was moving through someone else's life. Every instinct I'd relied on for years, my trust in my parents, my faith in civility, had turned to quicksand beneath my feet. When we pulled into the lot of our modest apartment building, I shut off the ignition and turned to Sophie. Tell me everything, I whispered. She nodded and took a shaky breath. I didn't start talking to Aunt Joanne until a couple of months after the divorce, she began. I was researching family history for my social studies project, and her name kept coming up in old articles. I remembered those days. Sophie sitting at the kitchen table, scanning microfilm at the library, scribbling notes. I'd assumed it was just schoolwork. She messaged me back, Sophie said. At first, she was cautious. She asked why I wanted to know about her. But when I told her about the way Grandpa treats you, the way he treats me, she opened up. Her voice broke. She said it was happening all over again. I swallowed, my hands trembling in my lap. She told me how Grandpa cut her out of Grandma's trust. Sophie continued, her words tumbling out. How he convinced everyone she was unstable. How he used public announcements to shame her into compliance. I remembered the whispers back then. Joanne is unwell. Joanne is selfish. And I'd believed every word. She said if they were making plans with Travis, you needed to be careful, Sophie said. Why didn't you tell me sooner? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Because you were so tired, Mom, she whispered. You were working so much, and you wanted to believe Grandpa was finally on your side. I closed my eyes, fighting back tears. You were protecting me, I said. Sophie nodded miserably. I reached across the console and took her hand. You did the right thing, I said softly. You were braver than I was. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she pulled out her phone again. There's more, she said. I recorded something tonight. She pressed play. My father's voice crackled through the speaker, low and matter-of-fact. She'll fight it at first, but when she sees the documents, she'll realize she has no choice. Travis's voice joined in, sounding smug. I've already spoken to my attorney. Once the transfer is signed, there's no going back. It's for the best. She's too emotional, my father said. Too unpredictable. Noah will thrive in a structured environment, and the property, well, you understand the importance of preserving family assets. My chest constricted. And Sophie? Travis asked. A pause. She's too much like her mother, my father said finally. She'll cause trouble if she stays too close. The recording ended. For a long time, I couldn't speak. They weren't just planning to take my house. They were planning to separate my children. Sophie's eyes searched mine, pleading for reassurance I wasn't sure I could give. Mom, she whispered. I'm so sorry. I pulled her into my arms and held her as tight as I could. You have nothing to apologize for, I said fiercely. Nothing. When she finally pulled back, she looked exhausted. Will you talk to Aunt Joanne? She asked. I nodded. First thing tomorrow, I promised. That night, after I carried Noah to bed and tucked Sophie under her quilt, I sat alone at the kitchen table. I pulled out my laptop and found Joanne's website, an interior design business in Bellingham. My fingers hovered over the keyboard before I finally typed, "Joanne, it's Erin. Sophie showed me everything. I believe you. Can we talk?" I hit send and waited. The reply came less than 5 minutes later. "I've been waiting for this message for years. Call me anytime." I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel completely powerless. The next morning, after Noah left for school, I called Joanne. Her voice was warm but edged with sadness. "I'm so sorry, Erin," she said quietly. "I wish I could tell you this surprised me." "Why didn't you warn me?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. "Because you were loyal to your father," she said gently, "and he was counting on that." Her words landed with a thud in my chest. "I don't know what to do," I admitted. "You do," she corrected. "You just don't want to." I closed my eyes. "You have to protect yourself," she continued, "and your kids. Start by gathering every document you can find. Talk to an attorney who doesn't answer to your father. I have someone you can trust." "Okay," I whispered. "I'll help you however I can," she said. "You're not alone in this." When I hung up, Sophie was standing in the doorway watching me. "Are you okay?" she asked. I looked at her, my fierce, brilliant daughter, and nodded. "No," I said, "but I will be." And for the first time, I almost believed it. That afternoon, while Noah was at his friend's house and Sophie sat in her room doing homework, I called the number Aunt Joanne had given me. Mara Chen, an attorney who specialized in family trust disputes, answered on the second ring. Her voice was calm and clear, exactly what I needed to hear. I explained everything as best I could. The documents Sophie had photographed, the recordings, the way my parents and Travis had orchestrated the entire scheme. When I finally stopped talking, Mara was silent for a moment. "Erin," she said finally, "what you're describing isn't just unethical. Depending on how they're handling the trust assets, it could be illegal." A hollow ache settled in my chest. "I feel stupid," I whispered. "Like I should have seen it coming." "Don't," Mara said firmly. "They've spent years conditioning you to doubt yourself. That's how people like your father operate. They rely on your loyalty to cover their tracks." She asked me to email her everything: photos, recordings, copies of any correspondence with Travis or my parents. Then she gave me my first clear directive. "Don't confront them again without counsel. And don't sign anything." I agreed. When I hung up, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in months: resolve. That evening, Travis called. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something in me wanted to hear what he'd say. "Erin," he began, his tone smooth and conciliatory. "I think there's been some misunderstanding." "Is that what you're calling it?" I asked. He sighed. "Look, your parents are just trying to help. You've had a rough year, financially, emotionally." "Don't," I interrupted. My voice was shaking, but I refused to let him hear fear. "Don't pretend this is about helping me." "Erin," he continued, his voice softening to the tone he used when he wanted to win me over. "Be reasonable. The Mercer Island property is too much for you to maintain. You don't even live there anymore. This is about stability for Noah." "Interesting that you didn't mention Sophie," I said flatly. Silence crackled on the line. "She's almost grown," he said finally. "And she's more independent. Noah needs structure. He needs resources you can't provide." "That's not your call to make," I said. "It is," he countered, "if your father appoints me trustee." A cold dread settled in my stomach. "And you're okay with that?" I asked. "Taking my son, my inheritance, my autonomy?" "Don't be dramatic," he said, echoing my mother's words. You're letting emotions cloud your judgment, again. I almost laughed. The same accusation over and over designed to keep me compliant. I'm done, I said. From now on, you can talk to my attorney. His voice turned brittle. Think very carefully about what you're doing. Your parents have resources you can't imagine. I ended the call without another word. Sophie appeared in the doorway, her eyes searching mine. Did he threaten you? She asked. Not directly, I said. But he doesn't need to, Sophie said quietly. Grandpa taught him how to do this. Her words hurt because they were true. The next morning, Mara called me back. I've reviewed everything, she said. We have strong grounds to block any property transfer. And the recorded conversations about manipulating custody, those will help immensely. I exhaled shakily. What about Noah? I asked. They've been promising him things. New schools. A bigger room. He's only 9. He doesn't understand. That's the hardest part, Mara said gently. Children that age can be influenced by adults they trust. But courts look at the whole picture. Your consistent presence, your bond, the attempts to alienate him. Judges take that seriously. Do you think we can win? I whispered. I do, she said without hesitation. But it's going to be a process. Are you ready for that? I looked around my tiny kitchen, the bills stacked neatly by the coffee maker, the secondhand dishes, the threadbare curtains. I thought about how hard I'd worked to build something stable for my kids after the divorce, even if it wasn't glamorous. And I thought about how quickly my parents and Travis had tried to strip it away. Yes, I said. I'm ready. That night, I called Aunt Joanne again. She picked up on the first ring. I talked to the attorney, I said. We're going to fight this. You're doing the right thing, she said gently. I just wish I'd listened to you years ago, I admitted. We all want to believe the best of our parents, she said. They count on that. I felt tears sting my eyes. Thank you for being there for Sophie, I whispered. She reminds me of you, Joanne said. Before you learn to be afraid of your own instincts. Her words settled over me like a challenge. Maybe it wasn't too late to be that version of myself again. Over the next few weeks, I worked closely with Mara, collecting evidence, signing affidavits, and filing legal motions to freeze any transfers of property. Sophie kept meticulous notes, dates, overheard comments, anything that might help. Noah was confused and withdrawn, struggling to understand why visits with Grandpa were suddenly paused. One night, after he'd fallen asleep on the couch, Sophie looked at me and said, He doesn't hate you, Mom. He's just scared. I know, I said. I'm scared too. But we're going to be okay, she said fiercely. We are. And in that moment, for the first time in a long time, I almost believed her. 3 months later, everything came to a head in a glass-walled conference room overlooking Puget Sound. It was a gray morning, the sky streaked with the first hints of autumn. Inside, the air felt charged, like the moment before a storm breaks. Mara sat at my side, calm and composed. Aunt Joanne sat on my other side, her hand resting lightly over mine. Across the table were my parents, their attorney, and Travis. Travis looked pale and exhausted, his polished veneer cracking around the edges. My father looked furious, his jaw clenched so tightly I could see the muscle jumping under his skin. My mother dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief, though no tears ever fell. Sophie sat at the far end, her backpack at her feet, her notes spread neatly in front of her. She looked so young and so impossibly brave. Mara began the meeting with no preamble. As you're all aware, she said crisply, we are here to discuss Ms. Caldwell's inheritance rights, the proposed property transfers, and the custody petitions recently filed in King County. My father opened his mouth, but she held up a hand. "Before we proceed, I'd like to formally enter into record the following evidence," she continued, sliding a thick folder across the table. Inside were copies of the documents Sophie had photographed, the recordings she'd made, and printouts of emails between my father and Travis discussing how to pressure me into signing away my rights. As my parents' attorney began to flip through the file, I saw my mother's expression falter. Travis wouldn't meet my eyes. "Ms. Caldwell has no interest in prolonging this any further than necessary," Mara continued evenly. "But she will not be coerced into relinquishing her property or parental rights." My father leaned forward, his voice low and cold. "You are making a spectacle of our family," he hissed. "You've let this, girl," he jerked his chin toward Sophie, "convince you we're the enemy." Sophie didn't flinch. She lifted her chin, her voice clear. "I didn't convince her," she said. "I just showed her the truth." For a moment, no one spoke. Then Mara began laying out our terms. Immediate withdrawal of the custody modification petition. A binding agreement to leave my inheritance and the Mercer Island property untouched. A formal acknowledgement that both my children were equal beneficiaries in any future family trusts. All further communication to be routed through legal counsel. My father's face went mottled. "This is outrageous," he spat. "You think you can dictate terms to me?" Mara didn't blink. "If you refuse, we will proceed with a civil claim for breach of fiduciary duty and attempted parental alienation," she said calmly. "I assure you, the court of public opinion will not be kind." Travis cleared his throat. He began. But my father shot him a withering glare. My mother's voice finally broke the silence, thin and trembling. "Erin, please," she whispered. "Don't do this." I looked at her. Really looked at her, and felt something inside me go still. "I didn't do this," I said softly. "You did." Sophie reached for my hand under the table. My father looked at her, then back at me, and for the first time I saw something like uncertainty in his eyes. Slowly, he sat back in his chair. "Fine," he said hoarsely. "If that's how you want it." Mara slid the settlement documents across the table. "We'll need signatures today," she said. 2 hours later, we walked out of that conference room into the brisk Seattle wind. Sophie wrapped her arms around me, and for a moment I let myself lean into her strength. "You did it," she whispered. "No," I said, swallowing the lump in my throat. "We did." In the months that followed, life settled into something that looked almost like peace. Mara finalized the paperwork that secured my inheritance and blocked any further attempts to contest custody. Travis, faced with public scrutiny and the threat of court action, backed away from my parents' schemes. He eventually moved out of state with Claire, limiting his contact to predictable scheduled visits. My parents kept their distance. We arranged short, supervised visits with Noah and Sophie in neutral spaces, a coffee shop, a library, the park. At first, the encounters were tense, brittle with unspoken resentment. But over time, the temperature cooled. I no longer looked for approval they'd never give, and they no longer tried to pretend everything was fine. Sophie flourished. Without the weight of secrets pressing on her, she seemed lighter, more like the girl she'd been before all this began. One evening, as we sat on the back steps of our little townhouse, watching Noah chase fireflies, I turned to her. "What do you think you learned from all this?" I asked. She was quiet for a long time. "That sometimes the people you love will disappoint you," she said finally. "And that doesn't mean you have to let them." I swallowed the ache in my throat. "You saved us," I whispered. She shrugged, embarrassed. "I just paid attention," she said. "That's exactly why they didn't expect you to," I said. She smiled, small, proud, a little sad. And in that moment, I knew we'd come through something that had broken generations before us. If you're watching this, I hope you take this with you. Trust your instincts, even when everyone else tells you you're wrong. Listen to the people who see what you can't, or won't, see. And remember, sometimes the bravest person in the room isn't the loudest or the oldest. Sometimes it's the one with the clearest eyes and the quietest voice, whispering, "This isn't right." Thank you for listening to my story. If you've ever been in a situation where someone tried to convince you that your reality wasn't real, know this: you're not alone.